Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to Warwick Racecourse. My name's Simon Cox. I'm the chair of the National Hunt Committee of the Thoroughbred Breeders Association. So this is our first attempt at a breeders forum on a racecourse. We were invited by Warwick about a year ago now to put this together. So what we wanted to do was have a really good, interesting, compelling breeder-friendly programme of races, which I think we've achieved, and I think we've been rewarded by some good fields. But we also want an opportunity to come together as breeders to have a panel answering questions, to talk to each other, to exchange views, and keep building our national hunt breeding community. So that's the idea. Thank you very much for coming. Delighted racing is on. We had a few tense moments last night with the forecast, but we battled through, and I think Warwick have done a brilliant job, by the way, to get racing on. So please enjoy the day. Please ask us any questions either today in the panel, or we're going to be hanging around in the afternoon, and if there's something you want to know or something you want to say, please let us know. Other than that, enjoy the day, and I'll hand you on to Jess.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. And yes, echo that, a very warm welcome to Warwick after what's been freezing temperatures, heroic effort from Warwick to get everyone here. And very pleasing to see the race card on, as of course also highlights the subject matter we'll be discussing today with the Junior National Hunt Hurdle kicking off the 7 race card. And of course it's also super to be joined by a really cracking panel of guests, and really pleased that Simon, the TBA National Hunt Committee Chair, and of course a breeder yourself here, Charlie Poste of Station Yard, young horse producer on both codes, but point-to-point, sphere, pin hooking, whatever Charlie puts his mind to, he can do. Also local breeder Grace Skelton of Elm Park Stud, the likes of Dink, Okavango, Midnight's Legacy and Subjectivist, some of your great stallions now standing at your stud. Jess Westwood, former jockey and national hunt trainer turned consigner and owner of Molland Ridge Stud in North Devon, and also on the TBA National Hunt Committee. And also John Spencer, highly respected vet with a wealth of experience of race courses as well as with stallions, and can provide so much insight for us today. Today we are going to discuss the challenges facing national hunt breeders, and it's so brilliant to see so many of you here today as we really look to find solutions for the challenges and to talk collectively about moving the industry forward. A bit of housekeeping: we really want to get everyone involved as much as possible, so if you've got any questions whilst we're having the conversation, please do put up your hand and we'll get to you, and we'll try and do some more general questions closer to the end, so we can try and answer what's on everyone's minds at the moment. So we're really discussing starting young. That's the purpose of today's event, and I suppose, Simon, it's no secret that British jump racing, the breeding industry has felt the pressure to compete with the methods that bring the French breds along a lot quicker, and also the Irish system, their healthy point-to-point system, which readies their horses earlier. So really remind us, with a view to what was created by the National Hunt Junior programme, where the British industry currently is in terms of looking to get horses developed earlier in this country and really compete with the precocity of the French and the Irish.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I mean, what we believe is that a lot of horses are benefiting from being broken in earlier, developed earlier, taught to jump earlier, and then put through a system which I guess selects the best of them to go on to be, racehorses. From the work we've done, we do not believe British bred horses are in any way inferior to French or Irish bred horses, but we do believe that there's a potential competitive disadvantage in the way that we're rearing them. I think the best analogy I've heard was from Guillaume Macaire, who basically said, if you go to the ski slopes in France, all the kids there are skiing at the ages of 2, 3 and 4, and by the time they're 12, 13, 14, they're pretty good skiers. You take an English schoolboy who's 12, 13, 14 and put him on the slopes, he doesn't look very good, and he's never going to be a good skier. And it's that sort of muscle memory, development of mind and body, I think, which we are potentially missing out on. And hence we decided to try and push for one route, and it's only one route, but one route where we could get horses onto the racecourse earlier through National Hunt Junior hurdles, so that there was a route for trainers to source horses, for breeders to breed horses, and for trainers to develop horses and put them over obstacles in 3 and 4 year olds. We're not suggesting it's a silver bullet or a panacea. We're not suggesting it's right for every horse, but we are suggesting it's a potentially good route to bring back a degree of competitiveness to British racing. So that's the thinking, Jess. And we recognise there's some controversy around it, there's some different views, but we still think it's an important tool in the armoury of British racing.
Yeah, we're 2 years in. We know that Rome wasn't built in a day. No stretch of the imagination with that. First run in 2022-2023 season, we're only a couple of years in. I suppose you've got the programme on, but Grace, it's essentially about creating the horses now or producing the product with the races there in mind. Tell us from your standpoint and from a breeding perspective what challenges there probably faces, or what you see as the opportunity there with this programme here.
I think you've hit the nail on the head that there are both challenges and there are opportunities here. I would hark back to what Simon said. I'm a firm believer, and it's a cliche, I know, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's horses for courses. This path is not going to suit, excuse me, every horse that comes through the system. But I think it is incumbent on us as breeders, and it sounds obvious, but you have to know your stock. This is an issue for horse people, to identify horses that are sufficiently physically mature, sufficiently mentally mature, and who are able to then continue down this specific route. And as Simon says, this is not the only way to go. We're not in France. The other thing we've got to remember here is that the French system has been the French system more or less since time immemorial. We're not saying, that overnight we're going to turn into France. That is, and in my opinion, is also the wrong way to go. I think there need to be routes for all of these horses to go down. Bumpers obviously well established, that's obvious. But not all of these horses are physically or mentally capable of running as 3 and 4 year olds. That's just a fact. But there are those out there that are. It's like children. Some are, I always liken young horses to teenage boys. You get some that look like 40-year-old men, but unfortunately still have the brains of 10-year-olds. You get some that are gangly, tall, physically immature, but mentally absolutely, very, very mature. It's very rare to get those two things in your teenage boys. It's also quite rare to get it in young horses. So it's finding that balance. And I think for us as breeders, identifying that early and doing a little bit more with them as young stock helps you to identify those characteristics.
And to that point, Charlie, you've handled all types of horses. What are we doing, or what can we be doing more with young horses from a breeder's perspective? When horses come out and we know what we've got, what should we be aiming to try to do more to get ahead of that game?
I mean, just to counter Grace's point, there are plenty of troublesome teenage girls as well. So as in for
I've never met any of those.
But I think the whole point of this sort of new idea is to try and also make it a more commercially viable for British breeders, that we can get horses on the track sooner, potentially see where they're at, and in theory make them more valuable quicker. I think the condition of a young athlete by doing more sooner in life is, for me, I think it's a proven thing to make them more precocious, make them more forward, get them going sooner, which for British racing we really need, as in we're a long way behind our competitors in these sort of spheres. I think the biggest hindrance to it is culture, as in at the end of the day we work for a lot of trainers that they wouldn't even consider running a 4-year-old in a bumper in the spring of their 4-year-old year. So trying to convince them that they're going to be lining up with a National Hunt bred young horse in a juvenile hurdle pre-Christmas, it's going to take time for that culture to shift, as in, if I'm chucking it out there, I thought I spoke to David Futter, who's got some interesting ideas about these sort of things, and the BHA would be up in arms because of the red tape that surrounded it, but it would be interesting to open them up to commercial handlers, these juvenile hurdles, if there was a way of almost like a hunter chase where, because I could see the allure in it. We've got a couple of 3-year-olds at the moment that I'd be very happy to line up in one of these National Hunt juvenile hurdles pre-Christmas and see if I couldn't make an upside on them by showcasing them those sort of races, because I think what needs, like I say, to change is often the horses look, in my opinion, ill-prepared. There's a lot of erratic style of racing in these races, and that comes down to culture. And I think for the industry and these races, that's the biggest stumbling block. But apart from that, I can only see upside to it. As in we need these horses out on the track sooner, showcasing their ability and developing that toughness to compete with our Irish and French counterparts, which I think is a big problem in British racing, that they are not conditioned for high performance because again, you look over to Ireland, you're buying an Irish point-to-pointer from the sale. They're probably, by the time they won their Irish point-to-point, they're probably nearly had on their 10th start of their life with schooling races and whatever else that they've done. And so for English racing, it has to be a good thing, but the biggest hindrance, like I say, is going to be culture.
Yeah, the culture point is interesting. Maybe bring John in from this perspective. Do we feel that the culture is there because there's a concern, fragility of horses? Is there enough research that is there available for the culture to shift? Is there a mindset that can be changed if we give more education around it?
So if there is a culture in that direction, it's probably not related to veterinary evidence, because the veterinary evidence out there for whether it's good or not to exercise and train and race young horses is really strong to support the fact that racing horses at a younger age is actually quite protective to them in their future career as a racehorse. So from a skeletal point of view, so a bone point of view, horses that race as 2-year-olds that go on to either race on the flat or go on to race in National Hunt are less likely to have serious injuries. And the evidence to support that is really strong from big multivariable analysis studies. In tendon injuries, actually the evidence supports, it's not quite as good, but the evidence supports exercising horses even younger than that is protective, because exerting those tendons at a young age during the maturation process will in theory make them stronger for the future. So the veterinary evidence is in really strong support of doing more with horses younger, having foals turned out, being able to exert themselves from a young age. And for tendons, that exertion needs to be under 18 months old. So the veterinary evidence would support doing more with horses younger and racing horses younger for the future. Now, obviously, there's not the evidence there from younger horses going over jumps, but at the minute, the veterinary evidence would be really supportive of what you're suggesting.
Yeah. So there's a mindset there that's sort of backed up by fact. And I suppose, Jess, from your perspective as a breeder producing horses who are ready to start earlier, are you shifting your dial with what you're doing with horses from with this in mind, with the program that we've got, or has there always been a way that you like to focus on your horses?
Yeah, no, completely. I was always very old-fashioned in my techniques, or they need this amount of road work, and I don't like doing too much with my 3-year-olds. But I have completely changed over the last 5 years in how we prepare our foals. Sale prep, race prep starts from the day they're born. The day they're born, they're analysed in how they walk, how they move, any limb deformities. For me, that is the start of their life. If we don't get that correct, then we're not going to have a correct animal at the sales. And if you sent them when they're half walking wonky or got problems, then it's an impossible job as a consigner to prepare that horse to match its page. For me, it's very important to actually start getting these foals prepped, whether they're going to go racing or for the sales. And we have actually started doing some work with our National Hunt yearlings each year. They now do a month's worth of sort of handling, leading, bit of lunging. And actually, we did 50-50 this year. And our yearlings that did the work looked twice the animals that didn't do the work. So at 100%, it really does improve them throughout the year with moderate considerations about each individual, of their weights and how they're moving and the individual itself. You can't push the work if they're too heavy or if they're too light. you've got to be very considerate about the individual itself.
And with that, why was that change? Why did that change come about for you? Say 5 years ago, you were old-fashioned. What was it that shifted your mind?
I think having trained and ridden and trained various different horses, it really did outline me of how, again, speaking about Charlie about it, how ill-prepared some of these horses are for the racecourse. And if they go on that racecourse and they don't quite know what a race is all about, they're not going to perform. But if they're multitasked before the race, before they actually hit this racecourse, then they've got half a chance of actually making it to become a racehorse. So for me, the conversion was physically, you can see them change, you can see them develop. They develop much more muscle as a yearling, as a 2-year-old, if you've done a little bit of work, than what they would have done is sat out in the field for 3 years. And also, you can understand any little issues before they become big issues.
Mm-hmm. And this moves quite nicely to Grace, a horse that could be a bit of a case study, I suppose. Denzel, who runs today, by Dink, a full brother to your star Nube Negra. What process have you been on from foal to this point to ready him for hurdling? And for those that don't know, he won his junior national hunt hurdle. He's running again today, and he's clearly precocious. But what's that journey been like with him?
Yeah, I mean, actually, he is a very good example. And at this point, I would just say I recognise that he's, in some ways, he's an excellent example. In others, perhaps he's not, insofar as we're uniquely set up with the stud that we can start him off. We can identify, and not just him, but all of the young stocks, start them off, identify issues, and then they roll very seamlessly into the training environment, with the training yard only being half a mile up the road. But basically, it's, as Jess says, it starts at day one. It starts at day one. You start to identify little things with them. You study their conformation. You get them going. You get to know them. All of us here are either breeders, interested in breeders, trainers, horsemen. You know, they've all got personalities, and you see that from day one with these foals. So he was always precocious. He was always physically strong. So as a foal, we walk our foals in the first sort of 8 to 10 months of their life. We would give them a conformation check every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on whether they've got issues or not. You know, if they've got good conformation, they're allowed to get on with it. But if they've got issues, they'd be walked every 2 weeks, see the farrier, the vet if necessary. Because as Jess observes, if you don't get that part right, they're at a disadvantage from the start. So through the foal year, they would develop as probably most foals on most farms would. Lots of turnout where it's available and the weather's appropriate, good management of their feet, their diet, you know, just get the basics right. In their yearling year, we pretty much leave them alone. They live out, weather permitting, apart from routine farriery, you know, worming, vaccinations, you know, day-to-day management. They're effectively allowed to live feral and exciting and develop. But coming back to a point John made earlier, I find that the longer you can leave a yearling out, the stronger they become, because they will exercise freely and they will limit themselves. They very rarely overexert themselves. Then generally when they're 2, in the late summer, we will start bringing them in batches. So of sort of generally 3 or 4 at a time. Bring them in with their mates. It's like starting school. If they're all together, it's less stressful. But by then, they are used to being led, because we lead from day one. Every stud farm does that differently, but we lead from day dot. So they learn it as a skill, and it's never a stress. They're used to the farrier. They're used to the vet. They're used to all of this stuff. So we'll bring them in, and we just start very, very slowly with them. So we'll do some lunging, we'll get them under tack, and we'll long rein them. But that process won't always happen all at once. I probably think I ought to have been a school teacher instead. I liken it again to school children. So what we will tend to do is 3 weeks on and 2 to 3 weeks off. They get half term, if you like. So when they start to get a bit mentally frazzled, or if physically one isn't keeping up with the others, or one's ahead of the others, we can use that 2 to 3 week period when they're in to start assessing them, assess how they move, assess their strength, assess their sort of their mindset, and then we can start to sort of stream them, if you like. You've got the top set, you've got the middle set, you might have the bottom set, and the bottom set, if they're not keeping up, they just get turned back out. No dramas. So then once they've been long range, they've had some work, they'll go back out. We'll turn them away, keep their heads fresh, and then at that point, we have assessed their physical state, their mental state, and whether we think they're going to be able to go into training. At that point, they leave me and they go up the road to see Dan instead. And then we've got an excellent team who work exclusively, really, with bringing on our 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. So they're at a separate site to the main racing yard. They're introduced to it very, very slowly. And that's when a different set of eyes, that's when a trainer's set of eyes gets on it, instead of mine as a producer's set of eyes, if you like. So Dan has got the benefit of me having been able to say to him, this horse is precocious. This one's a Fruit Loop. This one's physically very strong. This one's weak. This one will take work. This one won't take work. So he's in a position at the start where he has that information. And that, I think, is always beneficial to any horse that's changing systems. I'm sure Charlie would have plenty to say about that when young stock come to him. So then, again, they carry on. Then they start being ridden. And that process of assessing them continues. So some of the horses that, when they leave me, I'm saying to Dan, yeah, no, he's done really well. I think he'll come on. I don't think you'll have a problem with him. It might be that 6 months into the process, Dan goes, well, he needs another year. We'll stop. We'll turn him away. But others that might have just taken a little bit more time, when they come through, they go, oh, actually, and like Charlie says, they thrive for the work. They grow, they develop physically, mentally, etc. And so that's how Denzel got to where he is, And it is a case of constantly observing and understanding the animals that are in your care.
And with that, the likes of Denzel, the ones that you have been starting early, have you seen them being able to mature and prosper beyond just the early stage? They're not just precocious horses; they're long term. This is what you want to hope from them, but they are going through all the rhythms of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, any young horse, and they're not just there to do donuts in the Sainsbury's car park. They want to be going to Monaco and running in the Grand Prix. There's no point using up your miles unless they're taking you somewhere. And all of these horses, they've got so many miles in their legs. You've got to use them cleverly. You can't just go, it'll be fine and hope for the best. You've got to do it, as Jess was alluding to earlier, with each of the individual horses' qualities and indeed their weaknesses in mind.
And we touched on this, Charlie. Grace was touching on the different ways, the different approaches. We know that the French have their own ways. Guillaume Macaire, you touched on, Simon, says about having deep foundations. Their horses are jumping from the October of their 2-year-old career. Now, from your experience with all different types of horses, are there rights and wrong ways? Have the French adapted? Do we need to explore other methods? What do you feel is sort of can we benefit from a breeding perspective?
I mean, like I said, I think the sooner we can get on and start conditioning an athlete, and reading your point there, Guillaume saying about muscle memory. I think in elite level sport, it's as much about mental process as well. As in what we're trying to build is the mental process of competing and being conditioned to training day in, day out. I mean, from myself and Francesca's perspective, if we had the money and we owned our own place, I would be very interested in buying the horses that we're going to point as 4-year-olds, as 2-year-olds, as in I'd have them jumping straight away. As in any horses that get sent to us as 2-year-olds by owner breeders, I think it's a massive step up for them. We do quite a few for owners of Dan and Grace's that come to us at 2, and they're all jumping straight away, as in the only reason that they wouldn't be is as Grace has alluded to, they have to be treated as individuals. If they're not up to it, then it's up to yourself as a horse person to recognise that and go at the pace the horse can cope with. But I think if you're good enough, you're old enough, as in, and I think that's for people as well. Like the biggest hindrance to anything is holding people, animals back, because in theory they don't fit what we feel is the correct age to be doing something, as in, if these horses that we have are able, then we get on and jump them. Like I said, if we had our own land and we owned our own place, I'd love to have them as yearlings and 2-year-olds, do a bit with them, condition them, give them time, bring them back in, and it would make the process a little bit slower than it being such a not a rush, but essentially because of money and that being the primary factor for us as traders, we buy them as stores as 3-year-olds because it's the most cost-effective way of us not having money just sunk into the project for too long. I also think when we're talking about precociousness, I'd say almost all the decent horses that we sold, regardless of being forwards, backwards, whatever, could have all ran in the spring of their 4-year-old year. And we've been doing it for sort of 10 years now. And there's very few of them that have turned out to be above average performers that couldn't have ran as a 4-year-old in the spring. Some of them didn't because of various reasons, but they would have all been showing up well enough in the spring of their 4-year-old year. So even in spite of physical weakness, like the good ones, they just 9 times out of 10, they just have it. And yes, physical progress will help them develop and go higher, but I'd be very surprised if most of them aren't showing it early on in their lives.
And you touched on the point, really commercially, and suppose Simon ask you now, there's the want, there's the desire there, but commercially, is there enough appetite to produce horses to start young and feel that there's a commercial opportunity there as well for a breeder?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? Do we have to provide opportunities on the race course and change to the point Charlie and Grace are making, the culture, to then create a market for these horses, or do we need to try and force end it by creating the market that then feeds the system? And I think it's a little bit iterative. I mean, I know Tim Kent's here from Goffs, and I know Tats feels similar, that if we could create a 2-year-old store market, you could take these horses relatively untried and sell them as 2-year-olds, and thus give the end user another year to develop them and put them into these types of programs. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're locked into a system whereby people want untried 3-year-olds, and therefore, by definition, you can't do a lot with them, and therefore, commercially, you've got to look, an even longer lag phase as a breeder. So, I guess one of the things that we're hoping to see over time, Jess, is that the concept and the culture changes, the junior hurdles start to bite. That creates a situation where the supply chain changes, so that the proposition to sell good quality, well-bred, ready-to-go 2-year-olds will be better for breeders and actually better for the end user, because we're pretty convinced that will give you a better result as a racehorse. So at the moment, the commercials are tricky for all of us, aren't they? This is another thing which we think could actually help the breeding sector as well. And let's face it, we have to find a way to compete against the Irish and the French, who are mopping up a lot of the value. I mean, Charlie and I were talking earlier, and we all know it, don't we? You breed a racehorse or it goes and wins an Irish point to point, and you can almost name your price for those things. Charlie was telling me earlier, and I think it's fundamentally true. You do the same in England, and people won't pay those premiums, despite the results pound for pound being much, much better for the British breds, because the prices aren't inflated and aren't caught up. And so, all that commercial stuff we've got to be thoughtful about. We as the TBA have to support it. We have to drive initiatives. We have to think about what's going on. But in the end, I firmly believe that if we can create a race program that allows horses to develop better, you'll get better performance out of the race horses, and you'll get a better commercial return for breeders. We just got to get the flywheel turning somehow,
Yeah, and for breeders, in France, we know that the incentives are all there to race as well as not just breeders, but racehorse owner and breeder. That seems to be working very well over there.
Yes, I would absolutely love to have levels of French prize money and breeders' premiums and stuff, but I mean, look, the truth is there just isn't enough money in the system to try and recreate that for reasons everyone in the room will understand. I think what we can do is continue to work on some of the economic challenges. So things like the elite mare system. You know, we have a competitive advantage, I would say, in Britain at the moment, that if you buy a good race mare or a mare that has produced good stock, as a British breeder, you can compete for that mare, because then you will get rewarded with vouchers to breed from that mare in a way that doesn't happen across, you know, other jurisdictions. So that's a leg up. Things like the Great British Bonus, you know, that is levy board money specifically focused at developing British fillies and mares, and some of that money then gets returned to breeders and hopefully keeps the circle turning. So, you know, it is not the French breeding premium system. You know, we just don't have the money and the funds available to do that. But we are trying to think of initiatives that help the breeder, that help us to get the right mares, that help us to get money recirculating back into the breeding system. Still more I'd like to do, still more that I think we can do, but we will keep campaigning for that, Jess. Yeah.
And Jess, coming to you as a breeder, how much do you need to look at this? You know, you want to start early, but you want to breed smart though, and you need to be commercially viable.
Yeah, we're in the position where we're, you know, with most small breeders that come to me to foal their mares, they're in the position, well, where do we go? Do we go to the best stallion possible? Ideally, in the ideal world, you go to the best stallion possible. But we also look on the outlook of how well are those stallion foals actually selling, and what is their stud fee in the comparison to the average sale price of the foal. I would much rather produce a foal with a slightly lesser stallion but have more of an outstanding type of that individual from that stallion than have one of 150 odd of Walk in the Park that's a very average foal. We tend to look at just looking at a slightly different edge to our animals rather than going for the very best all the time. And I think it is important to remember that we are in a polarized industry. But that said, we also have such open eyes to how well we can produce animals, in the respect that the superstars don't just come from them top pedigrees. They also come from those lower class mares, you know, that are bred smartly from. So it is really important not just to look at the stallion, but to compare it to your mare, whether it's going to suit your mare. You need to be looking at the nicks as to whether the pedigree actually matches your mare. You don't want to be, you know, crossbreeding in certain aspects if you can avoid it. And it really is a case of breeding smart. So, you know, if you do have a moderate mare, try and improve her with the stallion. And if you look at our country with what stallions we do have some really good stallions. We just need to give them a chance as breeders. Numbers is obviously the biggest thing with, you know, helping these stallions, but also at the same time is breeding smart. You can't just send a mare that's, you know, not going to suit that stallion, because you're going to end up with something very disappointing.
And on that, as you say, you touched on, we've got good, you know, stallion quality in our country is improving and is getting better all the time. And Grace, to bring you in with the stallions you have on offer, knowing the market as well, and going back to the point of starting young, what should breeders and those wanting to start their horses earlier, what should they consider in terms of stallion choices from that respect?
Well, I think actually probably Jess has answered that question. You know, it's about knitting the right stallion to the right mare, and you can and that's the risky thing about what we do as breeders, is you can never guarantee the outcome. You can have I have a mare, a good mare that I sent as a maiden to a stallion. First foal was an absolute belter. I thought, right, fantastic, off we go. We'll go back there again. This year's foal, really disappointing. So you can't and you can never guarantee your outcomes, and that is a fact. But what Jess is quite right about is that you need to be looking at your mare. I had a new client came to me last week, actually, and possibly a good news for British breeding. Someone who wants to get into buying foals, pin hooking, doing something. You know, lovely. We'd like more of that over here, please. But he said to me, when you are breeding, he said, what do you breed for? Do you breed to sell, or do you breed a racehorse? And my position on that is you always breed the racehorse, because if you haven't bred a racehorse, you can't sell it anyway. We all know, and there are representatives from the sales house in today, we all know that we're in a very, very tough market at the moment. So you could breed a fantastic sales horse and it still go to a sale and not make its money. Equally, you could breed something slightly on the cheaper end of the spectrum. We all know we don't all have infinite pots of money, sadly, to throw at these very, very expensive stallions on either side of the Channel, either side of the Irish Sea. So what you've got to make sure is that you are getting your value from them and that you are breeding so far as we are able to, I would say, and so far as your budget allows, to breed to the best possible match for your mare and breed a racehorse first. That is how I always approach it.
Yeah, and this is where we comes back to that point, as you say, breeding a racehorse or breeding for the sale ring. And Charlie, looking at the options that you have there, what sale do you go to and you see, and we're kind of focused back on starting young. What are the sales that you see that are working, that are producing, are doing the job that you want with the younger horses?
As in what specific sales would we go to? Essentially, we would just attend all the store sales, as in what from our point of view, we're obviously working on a budget, we're pin hookers, and I think where the job has changed a lot, certainly on the other side, the RSC, is you've ended up in a scenario now where the pin hookers outbid the end users, which is a really funny thing, because I always feel as a pin hooker, what you should be doing is identifying something that the end user maybe possibly isn't that interested in, especially at the higher end, that then you can improve by performance and sell to the end user, And it's become a very different environment. We've always been very much of the feeling that we want to buy a model, an athletic horse with scope and quality, and we never look through the catalogue before we go, because I can tell you a lot of horses that are going to potentially make a lot of money, and if they're not going to make a lot of money, there's a reason we won't want them anyway, So we've always steered away from walking the parks and Blue Brazils and all that, because if we can afford them, we probably don't want them. What we want to buy is a horse that we believe is a racehorse. National Hunt breeding really should be an incredibly creative market. Like most good horses in National Hunt breeding, sadly for breeders, are often pedigree freaks. There is a huge amount that elevates a National Hunt horse beyond pedigree, as in athleticism, durability is a massive thing, mental toughness. We're talking about an endurance athlete that has to go through a lot in preparation and racing to really perform at an elite level. And so it should be a creative market, and yet what we've ended up, and it's ridiculous, is certainly at the moment, from a store point of view, or even selling at one of the boutique sales of point to point, if you've not got a Blue Brazil, a Walk in the Park, or a Jukebox Jury, you're swimming against the tide. So I suppose going back to what Grace is saying, we've always believed we're trying to buy a racehorse and not a sexy pedigree, and hoping that we can buy at a level that with performance we will increase their value anyway. Again, without, Dan has bought a lot of horses off us because I think he is creative enough to believe that the horses can come from anywhere. And at the moment, we've some lovely horses with them that are by Okavango, Soldier of Fortune, who they say they don't like, And, one that hasn't ran yet that we loved, and I think that they love it, by Ballingarry, So they come from everywhere. It should be creative, but market forces, fashion, people's at times narrow-mindedness dictates that isn't the case, and that makes it very tough.
Yeah, certainly. And as you say, fashion controls the market, doesn't it? And we see that time and time again. John, just to bring you in from a research perspective, especially with our mares and our stallions, from what what is it that we could be doing a little bit better from a breeding perspective when you're trying to be clever, trying to breed smart? What do we know that that are out there in the UK from a stallion perspective that we can be doing better from our mares?
it's probably a little bit difficult to add much to these guys, because I think that, you know, picking the right stallion for your mare is probably the key thing, and trying not to, you know, a good racehorse doesn't know its pedigree. I guess if you look at other disciplines outside of horses and what they do in terms of breeding, I suppose as a total, I'm not a total outsider, but if I looked at it as a total outsider, sometimes the methods that are used in other species are probably a little bit more advanced with genomics and things like that. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's what we should do, but you know, looking at certain characteristics to improve your mare, or you know, from a stallion, is probably the key thing. So I think just sensible breeding, breeding the individual. That, you know, apart from looking at more advanced techniques, there's not really any evidence out there at the moment. There's some genetic work on the speed gene and things, but they've never really gained traction. I think one of the reasons for that in our industry is that what makes a good racehorse is so many factors. There's not, you know, in other species, if you're breeding a dairy cow, you're looking for very specific things, which, you know, are much more difficult to find in racehorses. So, you know, I'm probably not going to be able to tell you guys to do your job better. I think carry on.
And Simon, you know, talking this, we've discussed this topic, and we hear it time and time again. Breeding a horse for the sale for the racecourse. You know, do you see the other side to that argument? If you see it, you must see it a lot from the other perspective. And how do you skew that? Was there anything wrong for wanting to breed it for the sale?
I don't think there's anything wrong per se. I think the issue is that sort of Venn diagram overlap between breeding commercially and breeding as a racehorse is not as close as it should be. And so, you know, we all know, don't we? If you've bred to walk in the park and it comes out well, you know, you've got a valuable animal on your hands, and that's probably right. He's a good stallion, right? So, but is he as good as the fee that he might command or the prices he might command? That's a different question, right? So that's where the commercial versus reality, I think, comes to play. So the market's not totally stupid, is it? You know, people go to stallions because they're fashionable, and they become fashionable through some degree of performance, but then that gets overheated, yeah, and there's an overcorrection. And so, look, I breed to breed racehorses. I'm a small owner breeder. I don't really breed commercially. I'd love to keep them all. I can't, so I will sell some. And what I try to do is get the best possible mares that I can afford within sensible price parameters, and then try and, as Jess and Grace have said, look at what stallion would suit that mare that I believe is affordable and has the right physical characteristics, racehorse characteristics, and genetics that's going to give me a fighting chance. And some of those are the more commercial stallions. Some of them are probably less commercial, but I think have got everything that you need to be a good stallion. What I will say in this country now, I think we are in the best position we've been for a long time in terms of the range and diversity and quality of stallions. And I think that's to do with many factors. I think it's new, enthusiastic people coming into the industry and giving it a punt. I think it's a realization that actually this is a good place to breed good racehorses. I think some of the schemes, like the Elite Mare scheme, is helping because, for those in the audience who don't know, I'm a shareholder in Logician. We could only afford to buy Logician because the shareholders of Logician had plenty of elite mares that could get Logician off to a decent start. Without that scheme and without those mares, I suspect Logician would be standing in Ireland. And I think that's the same for a few other stallions here. So I think we've got to come together and find out what are the creative ways to allow good stallions to stand here through the right economics, the right schemes, and work together to make sure we're breeding to British stallions, because there's some really good ones here, and we don't need to send our mares to Ireland and France, even though there might be a temptation to do that because of some of the commercials. I'm hoping over time the commercials will get better here, because I think we're working on the right sort of inputs and we've got the right sort of talent in the industry.
Yeah, And Grace, potentially, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about securing some of these stallions in this country and the challenges that you face getting them, and how long it takes, that process takes to get the band that you now currently have.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very fortunate in terms of how I've come by my stallions. Dink was the main man. He was the one that kicked it all off for me. And really, I took a chance on him. I bought him. He wasn't expensive. He's mine outright. And I thought, I'm going to give this a go. But he was 17 when he came to this country. I said to Dan, I'll give this 3 years. If it's a disaster area and we need to pull stumps, no one's lost out. Actually, as it turns out, he's having beautiful foals. He's having runners. He's having winners. That's great. Fantastic. It went well enough that then I approached Coolmore about Okavango, and someone said to me, how'd you get him? I said, I asked for him. Sometimes if you don't ask, you don't get. And he now is very much the flag bearer for the stud. He is, I think, well, I wouldn't I? But I think he's possibly the most competitively priced stallion out there at the moment. He's $4,500. He's had graded winners. He's had Cheltenham Festival winners. He has pointing winners. He has just every follow us on Twitter. You'll see I'm always retweeting winners. It's my very, very inexpensive marketing campaign. But off the back of that, I was also very, very fortunate that David and Kathleen Holmes, who are stalwarts of British breeding, unfortunately they can't be here today, but I would say pretty much everyone in this room knows them, asked me if I would stand Midnight's Legacy for them. I was very, very touched that they trusted me with that opportunity. And he had his first crop of foals this spring. Lovely, lovely foals, really nice, proper and national hunt foals, I would say. And then Subjectivist. Subjectivist came to me. Mark Johnston rang me, and I thought I was being prank called, and asked me whether I would consider standing him. There were other people in the market. I suppose in a funny sort of way, Subjectivist was the first one that I had to sort of play the great poker game of stallion securing with. I knew there were other people in the market. I knew there were Irish sort of punters in the market for him as well, and I just had to give it my best shot. I know that Dr. Jim Walker and Mark Johnston were very keen to keep him in this country if they could. And I think that is something else that as breeders, we have a bit of an inclination. Again, it's easy for me to say I'm married to a trainer, but we have a bit of an inclination to say we are breeders, they are trainers, they are owners, we are all separate. But actually, we are one industry. It's really important that we are all working together. And Mark said to me, if I can keep his offspring in this country, if we can bolster the British foal crop with his stock, I would rather do that than send him to Ireland. And I think, there is a lot to be said for that. I'm biased, I know, but I absolutely agree with Simon that we have got the best stallions in this country that we have had for a very, very long time at the moment. David Footer's got some very nice ones. Simon, and I was very, very sad, by the way, if I may just mention it, to see that Walter, whose name I can never pronounce, I'm so sorry, but Walt, as they called him, Walter passed away last week. I think that's a tremendous loss to us in terms of an excellent stallion in the British market. So I was very, very sorry to see that. But by and large, we have got excellent stallions in this country, and they are competitively priced in the market. I think the other thing we've got to remember is the second you send your mare abroad, the costs that go alongside that. A Coggins test, it doesn't feel like very much, does it? But, if your mare's out there boarding, all these little things, they add up. And there are definite benefits financially to being able to walk one in to a British stallion, to just get the transport for one day and off you go. And I think coming back to what we were saying earlier about this is a commercial situation, and when you're taking foals to the sales, and it is a difficult market, that you're not saying, oh God, and it cost me all of this money to go to France, and it cost me all of this money to go to Ireland, and it all starts to sting then, and it stings far more when you start totting it up. So, you know, I think, I know I'm biased, but I think we've got some tremendously good stallions and really good value stallions in this country. And they're not all, I mean, I think they are, but they aren't actually all 15 minutes down the road. But you don't have to go very far.
And that's exactly the point. We hear a lot in France. You know, they've got a lot of very good stallions, and they don't travel that far. They just try and keep it quite simple, don't they? They go as close as they can do, and it seems to be working quite well. And Charlie, you know, we've seen this, you know, years and years, the strength and the numbers of stallions that the French do have, and it feels like we are in a place now where we can have that. We should have that. So that's again a mindset thing that we need to reinforce to our breeders.
Yeah, I think definitely, as in, and like you say, you know, a lot of it is kept very local in France, you know, and supporting stallions with smaller books that have to prove themselves before they are elevated. And as Grace, Simon have said, you know, there are seemingly a lot of good stallions in the UK that potentially could make up into being very, very good national hunt sires. What they need is support. I completely echo what Grace says about cost, you know, as in if you're looking to breed on a budget and also commercially, you know, factoring in those extenuating costs of going abroad and all of that comes with it. It doesn't, especially in the market we're in right now, which is tough. It's tough across the board. It doesn't matter what sort of horse you're selling, be it a foal, a point-to-point, a breeze-up horse. You know, it is not an easy time to be selling horses. So if you can rein back in those costs by supporting British stallions, that's got to be a good thing.
And what about the concern that, you know, once a British stallion starts to do quite well, they might not be here for that much longer? We see a lot of great stallions doing well here, and they get poached. Is that when can we get to the point where we can keep them here as well?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a tricky one. But I suppose if the greatest problem we have is that a stallion is a success story and therefore gets poached, it's probably not that great a problem. You know, there are worse issues facing the industry as a whole than a horse being successful and moving on. I would hope that as we build up greater strength in numbers, greater commercial element to what we're doing, that we're going to be in the position where we can afford to keep those stallions and we don't need to move them on to an environment that is ever more commercial than the one that we have. And we're forward-thinking people that seem to be amongst this group. I don't see why that isn't something that is that too far, you know, is that far off.
Okay, and just a reminder, any questions that anyone wants to bring in, they're very welcome to include that. Jess, you touched on your clients and those that and their interests. When you're offering the stallions that we've got in this country, you know, how much do you need to sell them, or is it? Do you feel like they're selling themselves now?
Well, we haven't got any stallions very close by us, so anywhere's a bit of a trek. But for me, it's, again, I'm going back to what suits your mare. And there are mares that throw big foals, and sometimes, unfortunately, that's not actually what we want. We want a nice, all-round individual that will become a racehorse or become a nice animal in the sale ring. So I actually advised trying to look at the general outlook of how their pedigree knit together. Again, it's all about what that stallion's stud fee is, and will travel wherever, whether it's Kingston Hill, who is 12 hours away for us, or whether it's Newmarket or our local Overbury stud. They're all have their assets, and I, to be honest, the stallions that really stand out for me as a breeder are the stallions that stamp their stock. You're almost, not guaranteed, but you almost know what that foal's going to come out like. And when those stallions do stamp their stock, it does give you encouragement as a breeder that you are going to have a nice animal at the end of it. So there are stallions out there that do stamp their stock, and Grace has definitely got one, Overbury's definitely got one. And I think it's really important as a breeder, you should be breeding the best possible animal. And if you're not sure what to go for, it's commercial, you've got to have a proven stallion if you've got an unproven mare, and it's really important you take that into consideration. No one wants to buy a foal off a mare that never did anything, or a stallion that hasn't even had any runners yet. So that really should come into the factorization of breeding animals.
Yeah, and Simon, you know, it sounds like, you know, we've got the we've got the stallions there. We've got the mindset, especially the younger forward-thinking directive, and we've got the race programming that we see in place now, only on the second year. But what more do you find you're hearing from breeders and from trainers, perhaps from owners, that needs to be done to really push this forward over the next few years?
Oh, it's a very broad question. I think there's a lot of encouragement to keep doing some of the things that we're doing. So what we're trying, if I can just sort of try and explain some of the things we're trying to do as the TBA in terms of trying to create a bit of a virtuous circle. So you can jump into this circle at any point, but the idea being that if we've got an elite mare scheme and we're getting levy board funding to get more and more elite mares in this country year on year, which is happening. I mean, it's a real success story. There are significantly more elite mares in this country year on year on year, and as a percentage of our broodmare band, that's growing rapidly and is way beyond what you'd find in Ireland and France. So that's a really good start. Those elite mares make it easier to then stand good quality stallions, because if you're a stallion master and you're investing in a stallion, if you've got elite mares on the ground around you, you're going to be able to produce good stock from those mares, and you're then going to be able to have both the commercial outcomes and the racing outcomes. So you get elite mares, allow us, I think, to have more confidence to stand good quality stallions. Elite mare, or good mares times good stallions, equals good progeny. Good progeny on the ground here in the UK means that basically first dibs are going to go to British trainers. One of our problems we have as British racehorse enthusiasts is those supply chains of getting your hands on the best French horses or the best Irish horses. They're often all stitched up with the owners, the breeders, the agents have those supply chains stitched up, and it's very hard to break into those things and get the right stock. It's much easier if that stock is here in front of you in the fields or in the sale houses. So if they're here, I think we'll find that they're more available to British owners and breeders and trainers. That will hopefully drive more success on the racecourse. And if that success on the racecourse can then be bolstered economically by things like the Great British Bonus Scheme, that throws off more economic advantage, then be reinvested back into the mares. So you get this sort of virtuous circle. So what we're trying to do is support anything that drives that circle, whether it's more elite mares or the standing of stallions or facilitation of returns to breeders or Great British Bonus Scheme that allows the market price for fillies in this country to be significantly higher than before that scheme was introduced. We think all those things, if we keep at them, will drive the circle. To answer your question in a different way, though, I know almost every breeder, national hunt breeder in the country, is just worried about the economics of breeding and this polarisation. I don't know how we break into that, but I think everyone here believes the same thing, that the polarisation is bad for the industry, and yet it's hard to wean people off the drug of going to certain stallions or doing certain things commercially. And so I think part of the potentially good outcome of these sort of discussions is that we sort of make a commitment to each other to do the right thing for the British industry, because in the end we do have a great British breeding industry, but it's struggling financially, and we need to find ways to support each other and to come up with incentives and schemes that drive the right outcomes.
Yeah.
So slightly long-winded answer, but hopefully an insight into what we're trying to do. Yeah.
And within that circle, just if I could ask about the sales companies as well, what have you seen that is really been benefiting breeder and sales and vice versa? Yeah,
look, I mean, I'm very pro our sales companies. I think they're part of the solution. They're proactive. They're trying to help us. I was very supportive of the new Goff sale that came about in the new National Hunt foal sale. I think it's a good innovation. I think it's a good idea. I do believe that Goffs and Tattersalls are very wedded to helping us as breeders provide the right sort of forum for our stock. They put a lot of money back into the industry through sponsorship programs and help us. I think we've got to work together to agree that one of the ways that we can return money back to breeders is through the provision of 2-year-old sales, right? So if we can get the National Hunt Junior programme working, that creates the demand for earlier horses, but it'd be much better if we could then sell them as 2-year-olds, so the trainer and the owner has got that 18 months of development before they have to hit the track. Selling them as unbroken 3-year-olds by definition, you're not going to be racing them in November in Warwick unless you're very lucky. And so I think that's something that we can work with the sales houses to create a different environment for younger horses, because I think that would benefit the sales houses, I think it would benefit breeders, I think ultimately benefit British racing in terms of performance on the track.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Can I just butt in there? But also proof in our puddings is when we watch the Cheltenham Festival results and our big festival results, it's not just Irish stallions that do well. It is our stallions. That is proof in the pudding that we do breed good horses. Not only that, but with our Showcase National Hunt foal sale, we put on that show purely so everyone can compare those foals as individuals without looking at those pages, which for me as a breeder is a very good thing to look at, because you should be looking at those individuals. Like Charlie just said, when he's buying, he's looking at individuals, not necessarily the page. So those foals that won the show classes at the sales are not necessarily those foals with the best pedigree page. They are the foals that look good physically and they're impressive. So I think our industry does need to change, but we are trying our best to change it, and we all should believe in our own animals that we breed.
Absolutely. And Charlie, I'd imagine that the 2-year-old store sales, from your perspective, would they offer you another incentive from a trading perspective and getting a horse started earlier for a turn on your money just that little bit quicker too?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, like I say, the principle of it I completely would buy into. And again, I would imagine from Simon's point of view with these National Hunt juvenile hurdles, what you really need is a star to come through that programme, you know, as in no different to British pointing or any of those areas. What you need is a poster horse to kind of stand behind and say, this works, you know, this system works and it produces good horses throughout it, rather than just producing a precocious horse that can make hay in maybe lesser quality races right now. The 2-year-old sales, I think, like I said, from a point of view of producing the horses, it makes perfect sense. You know, being honest, from me and from Francesca myself, like I said, it would mean that we would have to invest horses. It would change our program in that we would be then in the horse for a longer period of time, because as it stands right now, we still can't run them till they're 4-year-olds in the spring. As I said, if the BHA wanted to open it up and let us run in these National Hunt juvenile hurdles, then it would be very interesting. I'd go and definitely buy 2-year-olds to try and target those sort of races. So, but that's probably a little bit far-fetched. But yeah, the 2-year-old thing, the 2-year-old sales thing has got to be the future. That I can see it definitely becoming part of store sales.
And it will links nicely. I'll just come back to you, Simon, on the route that we're on. You were still very early days, and even maybe some of the fillies and mares that are running in the Junior National Hunt hurdles, these are the mares, the brood mares of the future. And it might not be now. It's probably 10, 15, 20 years' time where we see the fruits of this bearing out.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our shared problems. And anything we do in National Hunt has a huge lag phase. I mean, we've got to remember, haven't we, that these races that we're putting on now, there hasn't been a single horse that's been bred for these races. There might have been horses that we've sourced for these races, or we've changed our buying practices, but we all know, don't we, to get to a 3-year-old or 4-year-old onto the racecourse, we have to have had that decision to have that mating 4 years before. So with this programme having been just in for 2 years, we haven't changed, or we haven't yet seen any horses on the track that were bred specifically with this in mind. So we've got to give it time. You know, we have to be thoughtful about the fact that these things take time. I do want to say, because I've got some BHA friends and colleagues in the room, the BHA have actually been very supportive and very helpful on these initiatives. I have found, working with the BHA team, they have the same aspirations and interests as us. They have slightly different duties. They've got to look at, more holistically at things. They have lots of stakeholders, some of whom are not very supportive of these initiatives, so they have to take those things into consideration. But I have personally found, working with the BHA, they want what's best for British racing. Their job is difficult because everyone's telling them different things, right? So I think we have to work with them to try and help them persuade other stakeholders that these initiatives are worthwhile and good. It's not the BHA that's getting in the way, in my experience. It's other stakeholders and other bodies who are much more reticent and maybe much more reluctant to change. I think I've gone on a ramble, Jess. What was your actual question?
I wanted to know about the longevity and the
Yes.
fillies and mares that were
Sorry,
racing
yeah.
now, probably the brood mares that are producing the horses of the
Yes,
future.
I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Look, yes, you are completely right. So let's go back to the beginning again. Let's say someone picked up the paper on day one that this initiative was announced and thought, that sounds a good idea, I'm going to produce a racehorse. We're still 2 years away from seeing that racehorse on the track. And if we're lucky enough to produce something that's good, then we're another 4 or 5 years from that horse becoming a broodmare. And then we're another 4 or 5 years down the road before that broodmare produces a horse. So we are talking about 10, 15 years of change. And we have to give these programs and these initiatives the time, because anything in our world has a very long lag time. Change is difficult. People find it hard to adopt, and the outputs only come 5, 10, maybe even 15 years down the line. So my strong plea for everyone in the room is, obviously people have different opinions, but let's try and get behind these initiatives and innovations. Let's try and support each other to do things differently. Some things will work, some things won't. But we have to stay with it, and we have to be patient, because I think the question you're driving at, these things take a lot of time in National Hunt to change culture, mindsets, habits, but also then just to see the results, just because of the physical time it takes to produce our racehorses.
And maybe, Grace, have you looked at these races? I know that yourself and Dan have been very supportive of it, but have you changed your thinking when it comes to producing horses, especially for these types of races, or does the horse come first and then the race comes next?
I think probably the latter. I think the horse comes first and the race comes next. I go back to what I said earlier. My mindset is always the production of racehorses, and I think that's something else that we as breeders and as a wider industry need to have in the back of our minds as well, is that the foal crop is reducing. This is a problem that the BHA are very alive to, and that we as an industry are alive to. It is increasingly a difficult prospect, and as Simon was saying, it's a long-term prospect. You produce a foal, you're not going to see. I mean, now hopefully, as we're saying, we're seeing them produce results a little bit earlier in their lives. But the reality is that it could be 5 or 6 years before you see that horse even run in some cases. And with the foal crop in this country reducing as well, initiatives like these, whether you agree with them or not, the amount of effort and thought and time that people put in to trying to incentivize the breeding industry, the trainers, the owners, the wider industry to work together, I think is so important on this. Because, ultimately, we can produce these horses and we can say, oh, lovely, I've produced Nigel the horse to go and run in one of the junior hurdles. But if the owners aren't buying into that, and if the trainers aren't buying into that, then you've got a problem, because they will vote with their feet. So increasingly, we've got to, I think, pull together as a wider industry. And, we've run horses in the junior hurdles. We've got one today, and it's been about picking the right horses to run in those races, as it is with running any horse in any race at any time. You've got to pick the right one. But ultimately, my approach is horse first, because you can't guarantee that the horse you've produced, as we alluded to earlier, can't guarantee that horse is going to actually do the thing you want it to do. So, horse first, and if the horse is the right horse to run in these races, run them in the race, but run it in the one that that it suits. But as I say, I think that we've got to make sure that we keep our foal crops as high as we can in this country, because they are significantly smaller. And, our band of broodmares is significantly smaller in this country. We've got to acknowledge that too. That in its own right produces problems for us as stallion masters. When we have got these excellent stallions in this country, we're all trying to increase the quality of the stallions we're standing in this country, but we have got to have the mares to support them. So just alluding to what Simon said earlier, about us supporting each other, I would really encourage us all as a breeding industry to look around and say, right, yes, we want there to still be a British breeding industry, a meaningful British breeding industry here in 15, 20 years' time. The only way we're going to do that is by supporting the stallions, support through schemes like the Elite Mares scheme, through schemes like the Great British Bonus, and through buying British as well. You know, not being afraid when we're buyers to say, as Jess was alluding to earlier, and Charlie, you know, yes, this isn't perhaps the sexiest page in the world, but what this is a really nice individual, and it's likely to be value as well. Mm-hmm. So, you know, just that perhaps we as an industry too need to shift our thinking about how we can support each other. We are a bit prone as a wider industry to pointing the fingers at each other and telling each other what we're doing wrong, because so many of us are doing things very right, and we ought to be supporting each other where we can in doing those right things. Whether you're 100% behind them or not is a different question. But, you know, everyone's got their heart in the right place. Everyone that's sat in this room today is sat in this room because of a love of the horse and a love of the racing and breeding industry. And the only way that is going to continue is if we get behind each other.
Yeah, well said. John, I want to bring you into the point that you were making earlier that really adds a backbone and strength to this, is that, as you mentioned, the encouragement or a sense of from a research perspective that we can do this earlier. But what can we do with the data that we've got at present, or do we need a bit more to kind of sort of crunch the numbers and see where we're at with these younger horses and how well they're doing, you know, from a younger age going forward? What more can we do to offer research and data points for people?
I think when you introduce anything new, it's important to follow the data and see what's going on. I mean, the BHA are pretty good at that. There's already been, various changes that are being made in racing, like the change of hurdles, the colour of them, the style of them, and all of that is based on work that's done on what the outcomes are. So I think where racing is at the moment with public perceptions, it's really important to make sure that anything that we do is supported by evidence, and that data is available. The thoroughbred industry is an amazing place in the equestrian industry because data doesn't really exist in other areas, whereas it does in the thoroughbred industry, and so it's what we do with that data which makes a difference. So, yeah, I think looking at things moving forwards, the BHA are pretty good at getting that data together. There's an enthusiasm for that, and it probably does represent an important part of the future of our industry.
Yeah, and from a perspective looking at 2025, I know there are protocols, EVA protocols in place that you want to touch on.
So EVA is sometimes a topical issue amongst breeders. EVA, equine viral arteritis, is a notifiable disease that is not a zero threat in Europe. It is present. So we get horses in the UK seroconverting. The problem with EVA is if a stallion gets it, then it's a notifiable disease, but need to be castrated, and then obviously it's a total disaster for that stallion. So the reason it's an issue at the moment is that the vaccine that's available that can be used to protect stallions is not available at the moment. It's not likely to become available for the next season. So the recommendation to stallion farmers has been to change the way that the EVA is tested for mares, like we've been doing it this year, and that's likely to carry on into next year with a few tweaks. People may have questions on this, but basically the testing protocol is changed because the risk to those stallions that are now not unable to be vaccinated is potentially greater. We did it this year. It'll be a little bit different next year, but essentially along the same lines.
Okay, I want to obviously take the opportunity to open up questions, as I was hoping that there'd be a flurry of hands. There is one at the back. There we go. I think there's a microphone coming around.
So I've got a really loud fan behind me, but I think
How
the
important
question
is
was
road work?
how important is road work? So when it comes to bone conditioning, that is probably still very relevant. But when it comes to soft tissues, we know that slow work or road work isn't enough. They need to be galloping, even as a young horse.
Maybe I've just asked Charlie. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you is what preparation techniques you've used that you would maybe encourage, that you think they should be more widely known. You don't want to ask every trainer their tricks, but what preparation techniques, especially from the youngest age, have you seen to be a benefit?
I mean, I think essentially it just comes down to a broad, wide range of education, as in, like, from our point of view, whether it's a breeze-up horse or a point-to-pointer, as in, it's not rocket science. Like, we can't make a slow horse fast for breezing. We can't make a bad horse good to win a point-to-point. What we can do is probably the reverse of that, and also all we're trying to do is give a horse the sort of mental and physical preparation that when they pitch up on their first day, that they are able to showcase whatever ability they have. And from, like I say, from that perspective, it's just a variety of different things, putting them in different scenarios, situations, and hoping that mentally they can adapt. And again, that's very much how we would select which ones are the right ones to run earlier in their life, is as much mentally that they are in the right frame of mind. They got big game temperament, they're going to go out there, then the lights are going to come on and they're not going to shrink. That's the most important thing. Whether it's a jumper, then it's about, can they go and find rhythm? Can they jump when there's things going on around them? Can they stay in the zone and produce their performance? And again, the breeze up, when you're talking about seconds, a second being the difference between first or 100th, can they make sure they go in a straight line, not lose their momentum, not be put off by extenuating circumstances? So, I mean, not that I've ever really been involved in breeding or prepping foals and yearlings, but I'd have thought the more you can do a different sort of things with them to make them mentally more forward, it surely has to be a good thing for their longer term perspective.
With the knowledge that you have and the amount of time you spent in probably in other jurisdictions as well, what do you see that that has happened in France that we look at and we think, God, are they doing things very, very early? Are they, or can we take a little bit of something from everything and help ourselves?
Yeah, I think essentially, yeah, we can take things from everywhere, but I mean, we also want to create our own product, and do it our own way as well, and. I think from listening to, and I've never been to one of these meetings before, but listening to what people are saying, that there is a culture of that coming through, that we're going to try and create our own young stock, our own industry, which, from what I can see from the time I've been in it, we're just we were light years behind from a commercial element of producing our own horses. Now, whether that be young stock, point-to-pointers or whatever else, but I think there is a changing in people's sort of psyche, and there needs to be, because we need to kind of reduce the gap, as in, certainly with the Irish and National Hunt racing, and I think the quickest way to do that is to produce our own product,
Yeah, absolutely. Any more questions? We've got seen Tim Kemp.
Sorry, it's less of a question, but I just wanted to give a sales company perspective, if that's all right. I think it's important for us all to remember where we've come from. I agree with everything that's been said here today, and I think the idea of changing a culture takes time is something that's very important to us all. I started with DBS, as it was then, now Goffs, some 18 years ago, fresh out of school, no idea what I was doing. I went to look at to do some store inspections with Harry Beebe, and I remember Harry telling me in the car that the only thing we can sell is 4-year-old geldings. No one else wants any other horses. They don't want fillies, they don't want 3-year-olds. It's 4-year-old geldings or nothing. And for a number of years, that's all we sold. And then trainers started to realize that actually they had an advantage if they could get hold of them as 3 years of age. They could do more with them. So for a number of years, we focused on 3 and 4-year-old primarily geldings. no one wanted fillies. The TBA then did some incredible work, as we know, to work with the BHA to bring in all the opportunities for mares that we currently see. Trainers then started to realise that they couldn't win the mares' races without having a mare in their yard. So suddenly there was a demand for fillies, and that's all changed. Now we've got to a stage where no one wants 4-year-olds. The same vendors that I was going into the fields many years ago saying, you need to leave that 3-year-old for another year, they're showing us 4-year-olds, and we're saying, well, we don't have a sales opportunity for that, I'm afraid. And if you bring a 4-year-old to a store sale now, all the trainers will turn around and say, well, what's wrong with it? It must have been galloped, it must have been slow, why are you selling it, what's wrong with it? So I think it's important to remember that over the last probably 15 years, the culture has changed hugely. And it will change again, and we need to work towards that. So talking about the 2-year-old store sales, we hold a sale at Yorton Farm, as you know. It wasn't there this year, but it'll come back next year. That has had huge success. David Footer, if you look on his Twitter feed, going back to your point, Grace, about free advertising, David is always telling us what a wonderful history of winners that sale has had, and you don't need me to repeat it. It's doing very well. We tried a 2-year-old sale in Doncaster. Now, there wasn't quite the demand for it. I think we got it wrong in terms of the timing wasn't quite there. These junior hurdles are still very much in their infancy, and it needs trainers to have the same realization moment that they did with the mares races, that they couldn't win the mares races without having a mare. They can't win these junior hurdles without having a 2-year-old to produce as a 3-year-old. That will take a bit of time. So from a sales company point of view, we are always talking to vendors, always talking to the TBA, always talking to anyone who will listen to us about when is the right time to reintroduce a 2-year-old sale. And we will do it. And I suspect for a period of time we will offer 2- and 3-year-olds. And maybe we'll be looking back in the next 15 years and we'll only be selling 2-year-olds at the store sales, and we'll be looking back and saying, why the hell did we sell 3-year-olds? You know, so I just think it's important to remember where we've come from. And Shirley, who's sat here now, Tattersalls in Ireland, the Derby sale, they are introducing 2-year-olds in June next year, is that right? Next year, yes. So they're doing it in Ireland. There's discussions about whether Goffs do it or not. That hasn't been decided. So it is happening. But back to all your points there, we all need to work together to keep an eye on where we want to be longer term. And please, from a sales company point of view, speak to us, because we want to introduce it when the time is right. And when there is, at the moment, there's a concern from 2-year-old vendors that they're just going to sell it to a pinhooker who's going to make money as a 3-year-old. That goes back to changing the culture, changing the perception, and it needs trainers to be buying these horses to allow that fear to dissipate. So hopefully that gives a bit of an insight from what the sales companies are thinking.
Thank you. Really, really helpful context. I know there was another question just ahead. Yes. We'll just give you a microphone.
Thank you. Peter Hepworth, locally to Warwick. One thing that concerns me as a very small owner breeder.
It's close to your mouth. That's perfect.
Right. One of those. I often wonder why singers shove a microphone almost down their throats. Now I know. One thing that, as a small owner breeder, I find there's very little support for us as when we want to go to the races. We don't get looked after. The one time we do look well looked after is when we've got a runner. But when we haven't got a runner, there's no particular effort made to look after us. At one time, the TBA used to have a tent at the festival and a section of the tent for TBA members. I think that's stopped now. I think it's time that they looked after, and racecourses particularly, looked after us better. I went to Cheltenham the other day. I was very disappointed in it. There were no facilities for breeders. There were really, only thing that the racecourse seemed to me to be interested in was syndicates and corporate hospitality. So when are we going to get racecourses looking after owner breeders?
Simon?
Great question. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think there is a lack of appreciation from some sectors of the industry about how vital and important breeders are. I would say we must do better, right? And one of the work streams that we've got on the National Committee, Peter, is about breeding community. And one of the things that we want to study is how do we get racecourses more engaged with breeders' prizes, recognising the breeder on the day who's bred the winner, breeders' facilities, etc. It's really hard work. Now, credit to Warwick, right? Warwick have created this day specifically in recognition of breeders, but that's an initiative from probably Dan Watson and his team. We need to do better to persuade other chairmen of racecourses or other racing groups that breeders are important and should be recognised. I'll be honest, it's quite hard work, right? But I agree with you on the intent, and I can promise you, as a national committee, we are trying to drive that change. That's the best I can do for now, I'm afraid. But I do agree with you.
An inaugural day, which we imagine is going to snowball to other events here, and I'd imagine other racecourses as well. Simon, I wanted to touch on what Tim was mentioning there about the success of the GBB bonus scheme, and that at one point was in its infancy, and that at one point, probably had its challenges as well, and it's turned into something that we can all be really proud of as an industry here, especially, the countries on the left and right of us who are look at it and see how we're thriving. What have we learned from that process that we know can sort of really help us at this stage with the Junior National Hunt Programme?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what the headline of what we've learned from that process is that well thought through, well communicated, sensibly put together incentive programs work, right? So, obviously there's lots of ways of putting together incentives and programs, but the GBB scheme, I would say, was very well thought through, very skillfully sort of navigated through the industry hurdles as well, to the point now where I think it's very well established and is working, I think, in two main aspects. It's definitely working to improve the commercials of British breeding, because previously fillies were not worth as much as they should have been. And that, in combination with now the improved racing programme, means there is a role for British bred fillies, both on the racecourse and in the breeding sheds, and the economics of that are changing really well. I think it's also working to encourage owners and trainers to buy British, and then we are now starting to see the performance of those British breds on the racecourse, because it's been in long enough now that we're starting to get some really good results from British bred foals and fillies coming through this scheme and now performing on the racecourse. I think most of you probably know, but we were very generously supported by the levy board again this year, and we have got a GBB Plus scheme that's coming in from January the 1st, whereby British fillies and mares who win any Class 1 to 4 steeplechase can get a £30,000 bonus. Now, 20% of that goes to a breeder, so that's £6,000 to the breeder of that horse. Again, it's going to take time, because you put an incentive in and people start to think about, okay, how do I specifically produce a horse to a long term, get those incentives? But I do think those sort of things will make a difference long term to the economics of the British breeding industry. And the good news is we now have, I would say, from a mix of opinions on the Great British Bonus Scheme, almost universal recognition that it's a good scheme across the whole of the industry, which hopefully means it's sustainable and we can keep that working. So I think what we've learned in headline, Jess, is incentives that are well targeted, well thought through, they do work and they can change behaviour.
Yeah, and you touched on the BHA and working with them as well, and redeveloping the programme book and making certain that that's a prime prerogative for them. When it comes to the Junior National Hunt Programme, we've seen 22 scheduled in their second year, 23 races in their first. What more work needs to be done, or are you happy with that number? Do you want to be pushing that number? And does the BHA, and I suppose how popular they are from a betting perspective, does all those aspects come part of it?
I'd be very disappointed if that's where we ended up, but I think as a start point, I think it's perfectly sensible, right? Because back to the point earlier that supply chains take time to change. No horse has been bred on the track yet in this thing. It's going to take time for breeders to say, what sort of breeding decisions do I need to make to allow me to sell a horse maybe as a 2-year-old, so the end user can get it on the track as a 3-year-old, or if you're an owner breeder, to do it yourself. So I think we have to wait for the programme. We have to establish a programme that's proportionate to the amount of horses that are going to get in that programme. If we put 200 on, then we'd have very small fields and they would die a death very quickly. So I think we've got to work together with the industry, including the BHA, although I'll say it again, the BHA being very supportive, it's other industry stakeholders that are less enamoured of this idea. I think we need to work with how do you ramp up the programme whilst at the same time driving behaviour change amongst the owners, trainers and producers to fill that programme up. I'd be really disappointed if in 10 years' time there's only 20 junior hurdles in a season. That's failure. But we've got to recognise there's a pace at which we can go that is sensible, that allows the races to develop as planned. There's lots of other nuances that we could talk to about how the programme's set up, geographically where they should happen, whether the horses should carry penalties, etc., etc., etc. But that's stuff that we will work. And Charlie's point about whether handlers can get in to get a licence to run specifically in things. I think there's lots of things that could help, but we are in active discussions with the BHA and stakeholders to try and make sure the programme works as intended over the long term.
And maybe touching on the point that was made about breeders' incentives, you know, a breeders' incentive there in that junior national hunt race that encourages breeders to race their horses as well at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a well-established, let's call it brand now with GBB. So anything that we did around incentives, prize money, breeders' prize, I think would ultimately come under the GBB programme, and how we could, you know, maybe iterate or tickle that. I don't think anyone's super keen on like another specific incentive scheme. So I think Jess, exactly right, encouraging participation through an existing mechanism is probably where we would like to take it, rather than anything particularly customised. Yeah.
Okay. Open up the questions to the floor again. So if there's any, there's one at the back.
I'm Lorna Hardwick. I'm a small-scale owner and an even smaller-scale breeder. Thank you very much to the panel for such an informative and thought-provoking discussion. I've got a specific question which arises from what you've all been saying about this great opportunity for British breeding at the moment, the importance of working together and of raising the profile. Now, we've all heard a lot recently about the new Jockeys' Cup initiative, the ITV Power combination. I don't want to say anything about that. We know that Mr. Power justifies excluding owners on the grounds he's only interested in the big picture. I want to ask about the breeders, because if breeders are not the big picture, what on earth is? So my question is, has the TBA been involved in discussions with ITV Power about this initiative? And if not, would it be possible to explore it? And if they have been involved, is there a mechanism for recognising British-bred horses and breeders through that? ITV does include on some of the parade ring captions the breeders. So there is, you know, a door ajar, and I'd very much welcome views on that. Thank you.
Yes, so on the specifics on the Paddy Power Jockeys Initiative, I don't think they approached us at all. On the general theme of, are we trying to work with ITV to get more prominence for breeders? Yes, we are. Claire, would you be able to give a little bit more detail than me on that? Because I know you've been more central to that than I've been.
Yeah, no, I could confirm that we weren't involved in those discussions on the Jockeys' Cup, but yeah, Simon's right on that. We've set up a broadcast group because I think when we spoke to ITV, they are approached by a number of different organisations across the breeding sector on a sort of piecemeal basis. I think what they said, if we can come together collectively, put a proposal to them, it's something that they'd definitely like to work with the breeding industry to do. So we've also involved some of the other organisations. We're actually talking with the ITBA, the British EBF and others, so that we can come with one proposal to them to sort of increase that recognition. It's a similar thing with racecourses as well. We have approached the groups, and it's something that's we're very alive to, and we want to work more to get something more permanently in place. But yeah, we're on it, and hopefully, you know, we'll start to see the benefits of that in the very near future.
And I know it's not ITV, but I'm on Racing TV today, and I will be acknowledging the breeder after every winner today. So that's my little contribution. As much as I can do, I will do. And I have do, but I need to get onto ITV, so maybe have a little discussion with them if I can get on that. I know there was a question on this side.
Caroline, you have that one. Speak right into it. Okay. It's about promoting our stock.
the trainers don't seem to, they have scouts going around Ireland, going around France. Nobody comes scouting. Maybe we're in the back of the woods down in Cornwall, but we don't exist. We try and promote ourselves, but it would be lovely if there was a bit more action somehow, that we could promote trainers to come and see our young stock before they've actually hit the sales ring. You know, that's what I'd like to see.
And from a promotion, is that a marketing sense as well? Would you see, you know, we see a lot of stallion trails and trails around other countries. Would we be benefiting from more of those?
Yes. This is my very short answer to that. I'm a very firm believer that actually we ought to be doing a stallion trail, but I have spoken to the TBA about that, and hopefully we can get some balls rolling there. But coming to your specific question, I actually do think it's a very valid question, and because I shouldn't really be saying this because I'm married to a trainer and I don't want to throw him under the bus. Dan is actually quite proactive about trying to find horses in the UK for lots of the reasons that we've alluded to before. Earlier, Simon alluded to the fact that the supply chains are very often, as he put it, stitched up. Yes, to a greater extent than others. But I do think that not just trainers, but agents and their scouts can be more proactive in that regard. But equally, I think and you make a good point about promoting ourselves. How do we do it? It's a very, very difficult thing. Because really, short of ringing people up and saying, hello, Anthony Bromley, it's Grace speaking, I've got a foal here that I think you should see, a horse here, a 2-year-old, whatever it is. It's a very, very difficult sort of market to break into. But I actually agree, and it's something that I've been speaking to a few people about recently, whether we can find a way of opening up a little bit more. As breeders, as stud farms, whether you're a big breeder or a small breeder, to find a platform, to find to create an opportunity, if you like, to rather than be a closed book, because we're not, you might not be a familiar name, if you like. I genuinely think that it isn't a lack of willingness to try and find these horses. I think more than anything else, most of these guys who are going around, guys and girls, trying to find these young horses, they want to be the person to find the next superstar. They want to have bought it out the field before somebody else has, And I think it is very often just a case of being bold, of picking up the phone, of reaching out to people and saying, I have this horse, I think you should see this horse. Or please come and see me. I have fields full of beautiful, beautiful, extremely expensive looking horses. Come and have a look. Because a faint heart never won a fair lady. And, I said when we were at the sales, it's hard. You get a lot of people saying, oh, what do you want for your horse? Well, you tell me. You're in the sales ring. You tell me what it's worth. If you want to know what I want for the horse, come and ask me in the field. And I can tell you then. It's very, very difficult. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that we could be more proactive about it, both as individuals and as an industry, about opening ourselves up. And I think National Racehorse Week, I know Jess has been involved in it, I've been involved in it, has also helped open up the idea of breeding to the wider racing community. I do think there is... there's going to be lots of people that come in here today for the Winter Festival to enjoy their racing and who look at the horse and go, lovely, horse, that's great. It's never crossed their mind that all of those horses were foals once. They've all come from somewhere. They come and they see a racehorse. It's the finished article. So I think both from an industry perspective, through the initiatives like National Racehorse Week, open days, visits, things like that, but also on a more micro level, if you like, in terms of getting our stock in front of buyers, we can be more proactive. I agree.
Just to add on that as well, I think it's not just, why aren't they coming to us? I think we don't promote our own stock enough. You should all be proud of what you breed of. Yes, there are some animals I don't take to the sales and I would prefer to sell them privately just because they're not that commercial. It doesn't mean to say they're not going to be a racehorse, and it doesn't mean to say you do not believe in it. You do believe in your stock. That's the reason why you've bred it. So be proud of what you've bred, but not only that, show it to the world. Yes, social media is a fantastic platform to show this foaled the other day, and that's a lovely yearling. But also, you can pick up the phone to any of these agents, trainers, come down, have a look, have a cup of coffee, and it's not just coming to see one animal. Sometimes you've got 2 mares, so you've got stock to show them. Whether you're going to sell it or not is a different matter, but you do need to show the world your own stock and actually promote what you have personally.
Just to jump in, I wouldn't take it to heart. You're in Cornwall. I'm 10 minutes away from here in Warwick, and most of the trainers that have runners here today will drive past the yard that my wife and I run. And the amount of times that I've said, you can come to the yard, you can sit on any of the horses. You know, if you want to buy them before they run, we can do a deal. Otherwise, you've got to feel for those horses if they do their job and they go to a sale. And I can count on 2 fingers the trainers in the UK that have actually come on a regular basis and looked over the horses that we have. So once again, I keep banging this drum about culture. The culture right now is that the only place a good horse can be sourced is in either Ireland or France. And so it's going to take a lot of time for that to shift. So just, don't take it personally down in Cornwall, because I take it pretty personally, and they're a lot closer to me than you.
I think you raised a really important point, and as you raise it, I think what's going through my mind, yes, we need to do more, because to Charlie's point, if you look at the owners, the trainers, the agents, they're all in certain habits, and it sort of works for them and it works for the ecosystem, but it doesn't necessarily work for the people in this room. And as we are the TBA, we've got to try and think about how we provide, ways of contacting, ways of promoting, giving the right platforms for... What on earth was that? Blimey. Okay. Giving the right sort of connection points to try and break those habits that are quite deeply ingrained. So I think it is a cultural issue. But as you raise it, I go to, yes, what is the answer to that really important question? How do you get the end user, the trainers and the agents to feel that they're going to steal a march on their competitors by going to our field and seeing our stock? I don't know the answer, but you've stimulated something which I think we need to spend more time on. So I don't have a solution, but I think it's a really important point you made.
We've got more questions. I know there's Robert Whaley-Cohen's at the front here.
Sorry.
Oh, we got another one. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, just very quickly. Are we going to start having schooling races? Because I feel if we are going to keep up with the Irish and the French, and we're going to start running these horses so a bit younger, presumably there was a maiden hurdle at Wetherby maybe a while ago, and I think it was carnage because the horses were all over the place. So do we think, presumably, we're going to need to have some proper schooling races, not necessarily for the bigger trainers, but for people to get involved in?
I think again, this comes back to culture. It's a lot easier for the Irish because they have a lot more space on their racetracks to open up for schooling, and possibly they also have less red tape around the way that they are put on. I think we definitely need more of a schooling race culture, and I think the obvious solution to that, which I think is starting to be implemented, is maybe utilising the point-to-point tracks to offer this. With my point-to-point hat on, it offers the fixtures that are often put on for one meeting a year, another revenue stream to use those tracks for schooling or galloping. Maysmore actually, which is where the Ledbury hold their point-to-point at the end of September, had a schooling morning. I think they had 100 horses over 2 days, and predominantly professional trainers who, from my point of view, it was fantastic because they didn't even want to jump the fences. They went round the outside and used the ground, so the ground was lovely and fresh over the fences for the horses that we took. So I think that is, again, something that needs to change. I mean, again, you look at a Willie Mullins horse that's lining up in a maiden hurdle. It's probably had about 10 runs in its life. It's probably had 4 or 5 runs in schooling races to prepare for its point-to-point. It's then probably been to the schooling races with Willie's lot probably 4 or 5 times before it runs. So you can see why their athletes are so much more prepared immediately for the intensity of competition. And yeah, I think there is a lot of discussion about how we can try and level the playing field with that. The problem we have is our rules tracks, like I say, don't have enough space to put on these events when they're racing so much and our fixture list is so congested. So I think the answer is possibly to have a greater link with the point-to-point tracks and using them earlier in the year to put those sort of things on.
Yeah, and I mean, I just want to echo what Charlie said. I think the key to this, if we're going to make it work, is a closer liaison between owners, trainers, breeders, and the point-to-point circuits, because, as Charlie says, it's very difficult for a racecourse to support this initiative, but actually the point-to-point tracks need income, and this could be a good income stream. We need better preparation facilities and more of them, because the fundamental thrust of what we've been saying this morning is, relatively speaking, our horses are relatively undercooked and underprepared when they go to the racecourse, whether it's a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old. Part of the solution, back to my point, there's no silver bullet. Part of that is, I think, what you're suggesting, some more facilities where horses can be a little bit more battle-hardened and prepared.
Okay, Robert Whaley-Cohen.
Hi. Good morning. Very supportive of everything that's been said today. I wonder whether the panel think very often the mares are retired much too late and they start breeding much too late. I mean, the French have a program, which I know we're a long way from, but the juvenile hurdles is a start, where they basically sort out the best mares at 3- and 4-year-olds. 50% of the prize money in France is for 3- and 4-year-olds. Fantastic racing program for fillies at 3 and 4. Very few after that. If you haven't made it by the time you're 4, you're not going to make it. So the good ones get retired early. It also means they have 3 generations to our 2 generations, because they retire them so young. Do you think we are retiring our horses too late?
Yes, I do. And I think the two things are supremely correlated, Robert, aren't they? In that if you're not racing your horse till 5, well, you're probably going to want to have 2 or 3 seasons of racing, so you put her as a broodmare 8 or 9. If you're starting your horse at 3 and you want 3 or 4 seasons racing, you can still put her to the breeding sheds at the age of 6. You know, so I think there's a massive correlation between us sending our mares relatively late to the breeding sheds and the fact they don't start racing probably 18 months later than the French would start them. So I think the two things go hand in hand, but your basic, hypothesis I agree with, yes.
I'll just put a slight different edge to it. I want us to be breeding off good mares, proven mares that do well on the racecourse. And to do that, you have to give them a chance on the racecourse. So I disagree slightly, Simon, even though, but I would much prefer to see an 8-year-old proven mare retire to stud than a 6-year-old that could have been even better over fences and never got the chance.
And I agree with that too. So just to try and clarify what I mean, I think if we have a program where horses are coming into training at 2, being taught to jump, they're on the racecourse at 3 and 4-year-olds, they have a novice hurdling season, they have a novice chasing season, a chase season, they can still go to the breeding sheds at 6 or 7. Yeah. So I think, both things are true. I agree with you completely. We don't want to be sending too many mares that are unproven or haven't reached some level of ability to the breeding shed. So I think that's well made, Jess. Yep.
Okay, I know there was another question at the front here.
Only a small...
okay.
Sorry. Is it on?
Yeah.
Sorry. Only a small question. Only a small question. I've had a mare, 5 fillies, all by British Stallions, which I like to run on the racecourse. To do that, I try and get some partners in to help with the costs. Come to Weatherby's and they want all their special particulars and national insurance numbers and you name it. And quite frankly, it runs in my name. I'm registered, but if we can't get other people to join us and racehorses in this country without Weatherby's red tape, it's a waste of time.
Did you hear that? The red tape makes it harder for you to have partners if you want to breed and race. And the gentleman was saying that they have to go through the bureaucracy, I suppose, that Weatherby put in place. The plenty of different insight that you need for your partners. and how off-putting, I suppose, that is.
I think there's no answer to that question, really. It's just the protocols of Weatherby's and ownership. The difficult problem we have is, supporting those bigger sort of partnerships, and I think, there's nothing we can really do at this stage, but we do collaborate with Weatherby's very often, and it's something we can definitely raise for the future to make an even easier system for our breeders.
I know from our point of view, and it's incredibly frustrating, anti-money laundering has become more and more prevalent. Certainly the regulators have become more and more aware of it. And I know that whether we like it or not, the running of racehorses is seen as something that can be used for that purpose. So even in syndicates, every owner has to be notified from an AML point of view. And we have to go through jump through the same loopholes when it comes to the sales. I'm sure many of you have sold with us, and we've asked you all sorts of inane questions, which many years ago we wouldn't have had to do, just so we can give you your money. So I'm afraid that is the way the world is going. I don't agree with it, I don't like it, and I'd love to change it. I know that Weatherby's are trying to find a solution around it, but I don't think it's a Weatherby's issue at this stage. It's a governmental issue to do with AML, and we as an industry need to find a way around that.
We've only probably got, thank you, Tim, we've probably got a couple of minutes left, so I suppose maybe one more, and there's one more at the front. Yeah, Shirley, and we'll and then we've got one coming out the front afterwards.
It was just going back to the point the lovely lady over there said about, from being based in Cornwall and having people go down, and seeing the horses. I know from Tattersall's point of view and from Goff's point of view, we do a very similar, job from the inspections point of view. I'm one of the British inspectors for Tats Island, so I will go around the country seeing all the foals and the stores with another colleague. And once we've seen them and once they're selected for our sales or Goff sales, we're on the phone then to all the purchases absolutely possible, and working with Weatherby's, we get the pedigrees through and we see who's owned any of these horses in the 3 dams. So, from that point of view, we're on the phone. We have a very select call list, and I can't speak for Goss, but I imagine it's the same. So we do we're on the phone making sure people know that, that these horses are out there and that'll suit their market. Like today, we have a Tats online sale. Grace has kindly supported it, and I went to see these horses and I know exactly what they're like. So we've been on the phone for the last couple of weeks, telling people what they were like, and to be fair, it works. So it's just we know that there's a lot of horses all around the country, that not everybody gets to. But from our point of view, I know the sales companies are doing our best to share with the public what these horses are like. That was all.
Thanks to Shirley. And I think we'll end up with one more question here at the front, and then...
Thank you. I came here today not intending to say a word, but my CEO, Peter O'Reilly here, and myself, William Flood, are from the Irish Thoroughbred Breeders National Hunters Committee Association. And I would like to thank your office for providing us with the invite. And Simon, just as the meeting progressed, and it's been very thorough, and I'm a great believer myself, coming from a national hunt background, breeding background, that what you have achieved in recent years with the stallions that are going to stud here now is to be commended. There's some really good sires that we'd dearly like to have in Ireland, but they're in England now, and good luck to them. And I will mention one horse, and that's Golden Horn, has been the #1. But again, just from our own perspective as well as your own, I just wonder, you've covered from breeding to racing in your topics today. And as a breeders' organisation, I just wonder, can there be more focus, which we try to do in our Breeders' Association, where I leave off another hat or two I might wear, in helping the breeder only, because I'm sure, like at home, you have many national hunt breeders who are breeders only. And to be talking today about taking them in, doing a bit with them, doing this, that, and the other till you get them to the 2-year-old stage is nearly possibly beyond a lot of people, as it is at home.
Yeah. Look, thank you. A lot to unpack. But first of all, thanks for taking the trouble to come to the forum and share your views. Just a few things to respond to what you said. I mean, obviously we're on a race course today, so we've had a bit of a focus on the links between breeding and racing and all the steps in between. As a TBA, we are predominantly obviously focused on the breeder. We want to play an active part in the racing industry because no racing, no breeding, and racing's got a lot of challenges. So we try and be a long-term strategic voice within racing, but we are also aware of what's on the tin, and we try and focus on breeders. And there's a lot of activity we do which is 100% breeder focused and not really on racing. But we do also try and ensure that breeders are represented into the racing world. On the mileage on the clock thing, I think that's fundamentally true, but I'm not sure it's a reason not to start them early, right? So I think you can have horses have long careers, you know, racing till 9, 10, 11, 12, having started over jumps at 3. I think it's how individual trainers and rearers develop and pursue careers with those horses. And I think it's the veterinary evidence is advantageous to get horses started early, but I do agree there is a certain amount of mileage any one horse will take. What else? Look, I mean, there's a lot you've put forward, but I think ultimately we have a situation where the other point that you mentioned, of course, Anglo-Irish cooperation will always be a thing. You know, it has to be a thing for mutual benefit. But of course, as a TBA, we also have to be thoughtful about how we ensure our members are satisfied with what's going on as well. But thank you for coming, and thank you for the statements.